mentality thrives on competition and elimination in terms of the matter that we're all involved in, and gives no credence, you see, to any other existence that we might be sharing over and above material.
Certainly that on the basis of what experience I've had, that mankind is aggressive, primarily, genetically, instinctively. I think, with all due respect to Maddie, I think that her scale in time from the caveman to modern Western civilization is much too short a scale in time to have any material effects on what I imagine is the genetic origin of aggressiveness. But to be more specific and to your point, I think that our Western civilization has been largely developed from a Judeo-Christian philosophy, which of course antedates our Western civilization, or possibly is the beginning of it. And I think these romantic attitudes which have evolved in the last 2 centuries have been predicated upon the wishful thinking of the Judeo-Christian theories and are not predicated upon a realistic understanding of man's biological or realistic aggressive nature. And since our standards of social organizations are predicated upon this romantic theory, they are bound to fail because they are not dealing with man realistically. Thus, change must be predicated in the future, if we are to survive as a race, on a understanding of man himself and a reorganization of social structures to comply with his innate nature.
I'm assuming that this innate nature you talk about is an innate aggressive.
Well,
yes.
He said
nature.
that, but I would like to correct a misunderstanding. I was saying that Western civilization is a caveman civilization. I was not indicating any change whatsoever, because the same brute force mentality, with which the caveman proceeds, is what is currently dominating in the world through this Western stance. So I suggested that this is opposed to the kind of civilization, and I should use that word, the kind of humanity that Mahatma Gandhi was speaking to when he said that we'd have to overcome brute force, if there is to be an extension of our species.
We would agree with that.
And I think that what you are doing is exhibiting a gross reluctance to view yourself as the primitive that you are, because Western man is hung up in a primitive kind of mentality. And not being able to vision any growth beyond where you currently are, you confuse nature with behavior. Now, we have demonstrated this aggressive innate behavior, but we have done this in a world where there have been other peoples who've not succumbed to it. For sure, they've not been able to evolve the material dominion that Western civilization speaks to, and maybe they don't even want to. I mean, it's my understanding from Eastern philosophies that they would rather everyone seek to express, contain, project, radiate all there is of a spiritual kind of evolution than a material, technical, industrial, military, mechanical kind of manipulation of the environment. So I think the basic thing is whether this aggressiveness is behavior, which is a result of some other things not operating, or whether it is the total of our nature. And I have a capacity beyond the active, passive aspects of what I do, the aggressive and inert aspects of what I do.
I don't think that we've gotten over an initial hurdle. If I understand Bruce in his initial remarks, he said that most people in the field are in agreement that animals are have instincts, and the degree that they act instinctively may depend on their position in the scale of development, but then I think he went on to say that you cannot observe or experiment with man sufficiently to make any definite conclusions. And it seems to me that you have to get over the hurdle of the jump from what you may know about animals to apply that to man. I'm not sure that simply because animals are necessarily instinctive that you can make that leap and say that human beings are therefore also instinctively aggressive.
Well, I'd like to speak to that. And as I say, it has been demonstrated beyond question that in many species of animals, aggression is an instinctive, built-in phenomena. As an example, a following experiment has been performed. A male stickleback fish is a favorite for experimentation by people who study instinctive behavior because it happens to show certain stereotyped patterns of threat and attack. For instance, it normally swims along horizontally, but its threat posture is to assume a vertical posture. Now, and the egg of a male stickleback is taken, and the animal comes out of the egg, and from the time the egg is broken, he is kept in complete isolation. He never sees another fish, but he's allowed to mature. Then the first time, if his aquarium then another aquarium with another male stickleback is brought next to his aquarium. The first time that other male stickleback swims towards him, he shows the threat posture and starts to attack the male stickleback. This is an example of a case where I think there's just no other explanation but that this behavior is built in. Now,
but it's not consistent throughout even the animal kingdom that there is aggression, or that there is even what was previously discussed, a concept or an instinct toward protecting territory, acquiring property, defending a space, and so on. This is not consistent throughout even the animal kingdom, and the the higher apes, which are closer as far as mammals are concerned to human beings than any of the other animals, are innately not aggressive. They are not instinctively aggressive. And in fact, chimpanzees are described by somebody like Robert Ardrey, who wrote The Territorial Imperative, as an evolutionary failure because they are not aggressive and don't fit his theory.
That's correct. That's correct. But Ardrey says, or at least those, and it should be clearly stated here that Ardrey doesn't propose to be a scientist, but rather a reporter. And the work that he reports is based upon scientific investigation by many different scientists. But Raymond Dart, of course, in South Africa, developed or discovered or identified the so-called Tong skull, which is the, as far as I know, not being an expert in the field, is the closest connection that we are today aware of between man and his primate past. And this primate past is somewhat below, I think, in terms of Darwinian evolution, the chimpanzee and so forth. But the theory that is propounded by the behavioralists is that in order to survive in a diminishing climate of abundance, i.e. a jungle. The jungle in Africa where we, mankind, originated was declining, and many of the apes had to get onto terrain, and thus we developed a offshoot of the normal primates and survived by our predatory instincts, by our ability to make weapons and so forth, and by our ability to act in concert in herd relationships, which of course is the basis of altruism and what we all call love today, just to escalate this discussion a little bit.
Well, and let's escalate it a little bit further in terms of this early development and what you call the herd instinct, or the herd
Marion, I would like to state that we're existing in a time-place thing, which is very critical in terms of human beings. And I think that we ought to accept that all we know about human beings is past behavior, and certainly nothing about nature in its total potential. I think we have to agree that we really can't define our nature because we're operating with less than 20% of our mental capacity, and if we're ever going to reflect and retrospect and conceptualize about ourselves to any useful degree, it's going to have to use some more of our mental capacities than we're currently using as man. But in terms of the crisis, I feel that the belief in a territorial imperative is a direct threat to my life. And this is why I take the time, you know, like 24 hours a day to speak to that in everything that I do. Because I believe—
You're speaking as a black now.
I'm speaking as a human being. I get this experience out of being black in America today. I get this experience from living a culture of oppression, which is the other side of the territorial imperative. In other words, if you believe in the territorial imperative as a natural inclination of man, you not only have to validate the gang fights in our community as adequate preparation for young people who are going to enter that kind of an adulthood, but you also have to then say that there's such a thing as squatters' rights. And you see, as a civilization, you've never said this. So when you talk about territorial imperatives, just as you talk about aggression, you're simply viewing that half of the coin which has your picture on it. And what I'm about is that we should begin to look at man in some kind of potential wholeness, some kind of capacity for wholeness, or we can stop worrying about, you know, a beyond this point type of future.
I agree with what what we should do. I agree that
Well, that's
we
what I
have
want
to,
us to do here today.
All right,
So
all right,
if
but-
we're talking about survival,
Right,
also
yeah.
We've
here
got
of
to
human
recognize,
beings.
though.
what man is.
Go ahead.
Well, I've recognized that, you know, I, you see, am a creature of a much higher imagination than one who would depict me in terms of a naturally aggressive creature. I am not that. Now, if that's your species, why don't we get to defining, you know, which species is evolving to what level and which would be better? Now, I believe, you know, that you have the capacity to evolve to a higher level of reality than brute force. I admit that masculine domination in Western civilization has reduced us to a brute force, you know, nation and civilization. I'm suggesting that now's the time to, you know, redirect some of that authoritarianism and become a little more authentic to the kind of beings that we can become.
Well, we agree on that point, but I don't agree on the, I agree on your objectives totally, but I certainly don't agree on the rationale to which you arrive at the objectives.
Well, then let's just consider the vision and the objectives. You know, is that a valid place to be headed, and if so, how do we get there?
And
Well,
my main concern is to see in what way, or to dream, to imagine, to try and think of some way through which, with an understanding of human nature, with an understanding of human nature, through which we can redirectionalize our
I'm
society
suggesting, Lloyd,
Well,
if
what
you
means-
the objective
wait a minute,
that you're talking
that if you
about.
have territorial imperative, then you have to allow squatters' rights, which
Why?
means that
It's
you
not
have
a
to,
question of
because
allowing,
it's the
they
same
are.
thing.
They
All right,
are.
there was
Yes,
one
but just
you're not
because you
about.
have, just
It's
because if a man is
exactly the
basically
same
aggressive, it doesn't mean that if a man has, as I believe, basically built-in aggressive impulses, that doesn't mean, therefore, that war is right,
I
or
didn't
that
say
killing is
anything
right,
about
or that the
war.
territorial
I
imperative
Squatters'
is
I
right.
rights.
said that if you allow that territorial imperative is a natural thing,
Yes.
then you have to allow that squatters' rights is equally natural.
We agree, it is.
So then why don't we right now begin to decolonize our ghettos so that the equality that we seek becomes meaningful? We are not in a position as black people in America to live out the so-called affluent abundance that you're talking about. All right, then let us decolonize and let us have squatters' rights where we are.
Well, now, wait a minute.
And I'd
now.
like
I mean,
to-
even
Now,
though
hang on.
I'd
You
like to
talk
relate
very-
this, Lloyd, to something that we did discuss a little bit earlier, because the man is the only living creature that has developed religious concepts, that has developed other concepts which transcend biology. And I'd like to know how this squares with the religious beliefs.
Well,
Judah,
at the
perhaps
risk
you'd like
of,
to
at the
speak
risk
to
of
this.
being repetitious for a minute, I agree with Lloyd that to do or to achieve the goals that Maddie wants to achieve, you have to first have an understanding of man. But I get the impression Lloyd feels he has that in terms of his acceptance of the territorial imperative, but I still don't feel I've gotten an answer to what evidence you bring to bear to sustain your initial assumption about an understanding of man. Because my understanding of man on the basis of a religious background is quite different. I come
Would
from
you
a
elaborate
tradition
on that?
in which man is essentially conceived as neutral, that he has a lot of potentialities in various directions. In the Hebraic tradition, we use the word yetzer, which means an inclination, and he has a good inclination and a bad inclination, which are in balance. And that it's up to man at that point then to do as he sees fit with those inclinations, either to reduce his evil aggressiveness, if you want to use it in those terms, or to strengthen the good in him. But you start from a different assumption, which I still don't see the evidence for.
I'd like to
Bruce.
interpose, if I might, because I didn't get a chance really to follow up a little more on the evidence that I wanted to talk about very briefly. I talked about this one species of fish, of course, in which it's been proven that this particular kind of aggressive behavior is innate. Well, the main point I'd like to make, though, is that we see that the majority of the species which have been studied do show aggressive behavior. And in many of these, there have been elegant experiments performed proving that this is innate. In many others, the elegant experiments haven't been performed, but the behavior being highly stereotyped, that's one of the hallmarks of instinctive behavior, that it's very stereotyped. Every animal does it in almost the same way.
In response to the same stimuli.
In response to the same stimuli.
Which I'd like to come back to that.
All right, but the major point that I want to make is that in general, that if we see a phenomena throughout a wide range of species, that it's then unlikely that there's going to be one species that doesn't have any of this characteristic. And as Lloyd was saying, is there probably has been little genetic change since Cro-Magnon man. Probably genetically, we're basically the same. And the early men were probably social hunting primates. By the way, and I'd like to say that the chimpanzee, by the way, is an aggressive animal. There is a pecking order in chimpanzee groups, and they are aggressive. And other social primates in general are aggressive. And man is a social primate.
But the term social in itself connotes cooperation.
Right.
It connotes,
it does.
it connotes the antithesis
To say that there's
of
aggression doesn't say that there isn't cooperation also. And that's another point that I want to make.
And that this has been the mainstream of human development. It has been the cooperative periods that have enabled the next stage of growth to develop.
Yes,
total aggressiveness would have had the small populations wiping each other out long before
Well,
this. We wouldn't
a
even be
major
here.
point that needs to be made is
Right.
that aggression in other species is very adaptive. It has an adaptive value. Aggression in other species tends to do a variety of things, among which probably the most important are, number one, to spread the animals out so that they all they tend to
have enough space.
have a territory of their own. They have enough space. Therefore, they have enough.
Yeah, but
they have enough
Bruce,
food.
when
Pardon
you
me, just
describe,
let me finish.
well, wait a minute, I'd like to go back to something you said, and I'm trying to wait before I lose it.
All right.
Something about the numbers of members of a species exhibiting something, therefore. But you see, you've overlooked the millions of people who've accepted a passive existence in the many, Eastern,
Right.
Asian,
I haven't
what
gotten to
have
talking
you.
to people
I'm
about. I
saying,
haven't gotten to talking
no,
about people yet.
But I'm saying, so
Well,
this
let's talk
species,
about
man, doesn't fit in with that generality. I mean, it has some other factor operating
Yeah.
over and above the factor you're describing. And I'm saying it's all right to describe that, but I think we should be getting those factors
just
which
man.
man has.
All right, just let me
Maddie-
finish though this about that these, as I say, animals in general, and the social primates included, show these aggressive patterns of behavior, and therefore, I think it is, as I say, it's unlikely that man is different. Now, the thing about
Man is already
the
different
thing
by
about
having developed language.
Yeah, the main difference in man is that man is the only mass killer of his own species. Aggression in other animals, between the members of the same species. Now, we said that we're eliminating now predator-prey relationships. Rarely, almost never results in killing, and rarely even results in bloodshed.
Well, what is the reason for this, given your premise? How do you explain that?
Because
man is a mass killer?
evolutionary mechanisms have the other animals have had time so that they have evolved evolved, and they have certain rules for the game.
This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say this mass killing is a cultural phenomenon of Western civilization, and you just can't continue to apply it to mankind.
I disagree with that
You just
absolutely
can't do that.
fundamentally,
Well,
Maddie.
Western
I think-
civilization is the only
think that-
civilization in which there's been mass killing.
No, I'm
just
saying
wrong.
this characteristic that you're describing is a cultural phenomenon that I say is peculiar to Western civilization because it has not operated to that extent with all civilizations.
I
What
disagree. I
kind
think
of
it has.
cultural phenomenon, Lloyd, could you foresee our moving toward or trying to develop that will move beyond this?
Well, I'd like to answer that, but I want to answer directly to Maddie because I think it's a very important point. I do not think, at the level we're discussing here, that racism or nationality has the slightest bearing on the discussion. We're talking about Homo sapiens, and as far as I know, according to scientists, there is no difference, no significant difference between the Mongoloid, the Negroid, the Caucasian races in terms of their Homo sapien
Understand the
anatomy.
point I'm getting at is that you're using Western recorded history for your evidence.
No, I'm not. I'm
Well,
reading
these are the
the
things.
Japanese, the
No,
Chinese,
these are the things that
the,
have been described here in this conversation as evidence.
only
You
possibly
see.
because we're more familiar with them. But
Well, I'm saying then just limit what your conclusions refer to the character that you're getting your evidence from, and that's Western man.
We're
Now,
saying-
unless you want to go into some other civilizations and indicate, you know, the kind of evidence that supports what you clearly are all about in Western civilization.
I maintain that the Eastern civilizations of India or China, or whichever you'd like to pick, is just as aggressive as ours, as the Western civilization.
But they're considerably more passive than yours. You see, what I'm trying to get at is that man has, as Jude said, several, you know, he's a whole. You know, he
In the days of
seeks-
Genghis Khan,
he
you think
seeks
that the Asiatics
mankind
Let's look
from
at
the
now.
beginning has had some balance of capacities, and the behavior that he chooses, I say, should be aimed at balance at higher levels, whereas the behavior that Western man is choosing is a static thing at a brute force level. And so it's not a quest or a search, it's a domination that this Western man is about. And that's why you come out with aggression always on top, because that's the value.
And the Chinese are not aggressive today.
I'm not going to get into
With the
that
Red
because
Guard?
the Chinese have certain characteristics today in common with Western civilization, which is why
Well,
it's
what-
becoming very critical. The territorial imperative
All right, what
is
doesn't
exactly.
have characteristics in common with Western?
I don't want to get into
But
that
Lloyd,
debate
Well,
we
either.
come on, you
need
have
to-
to.
No, I
because
want to
you're
say.
segregating the Western man, and I say
No,
there's no
I'm
difference
saying,
between Western
I'm
man
saying
and
that
any
the
other
evidence
man.
you've brought to this conversation
it's
is
irrelevant.
limited to Western man, and therefore
right,
your conclusions must be in reference to
well,
Western
what's
man.
the
I'd like
evidence
to
then
say
from
too
other-
that we're talking about behavior, and
That's right.
and we're talking about behavior interchangeably with something that is considered to be innate.
That's right.
We are assuming then that what we see as the behavior
Can be
of
called
human
innate
beings
in
right
that
now
sense.
is being called innate, when actually all that we can measure is behavior as far as human beings are concerned. And then we have to look to see how this behavior arose and how it developed, whether it was provoked. And
Right.
certainly aggression in response to provoked situations, in defense, in search of food, in search of the necessities of life, is behavior which we can see evidence of around us. But to imply and to insist that this is instinctive simply because it is there, it seems to me to beg the question. It also denies the concepts of the
well, I don't
Judeo.
apply that
I'd like
at
to hear
all.
what Judith
Maddie
thinks on
just
this.
used the
If
expression.
all man throughout all history, throughout all races, behaves in the same pattern, I don't see how you could deny
There's
that
a
it's
diversity
instinctive.
of pattern. You're denying the
Only
diversity. You are
superficially.
selecting from,
superficially.
you are selecting, and your theory that you expound is selecting from within the diversity of behavior, even within these borders between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. The Hopi Indians have a non-aggressive culture, a non-aggressive approach, a cooperative approach, which is certainly a part of the whole human diversity. This theory and this concept is sort of self-fulfilling prophecy because it denies that end of the diversity. And as I'd like to
Well, Maddie just used the
open up
expression a
to
minute
Judith
ago
on this.
about man as a whole, and I wanted to relate that back to something
Yeah,
Bruce
this-
had said. You say that if most of animal life exhibits the concept of instinct, that it's most probable that man would not be an exception to that. Maybe I'm raising the old bugaboo of religion and science. I hope not. But it seems to me that leaves out of the equation the possibility that man is something greater than the sum of his genetic makeup or his muscular makeup or his nervous system and so on,
Precisely.
which I'm not willing to grant. And that I can conceive, because of my religious background, that man not necessarily follow the pattern of the rest of the animal kingdom, and that it is conceivable that one species could be different and not follow the same pattern.
And it's not so much different, but that he has internalized the characteristics of the lower order, but he has capacities for higher orders that, when we paralyze him psychologically and through all of our so-called civilizations, when we paralyze him at the brute force level, which is what might makes right and territorial imperative translates into, we inhibit, his potential for growth, for using those faculties of conceptualization and visualization, planning, all of those faculties that the other species do not have. And we know we have, I know I have these capacities.
Well, and we also have the capacity for making moral choices, and we have to ask, in view of this
we can visualize
debate,
a model,
on what
and then we can
basis
create
to
it.
make these moral choices, on the basis of an innate evil or bad or aggressive or hostile nature of man, or on the basis of the diversity of
Potential.
human potential. And I think we've got to ask, what are the responsibilities of human beings to each other, and the responsibilities of the religions?
We can
towards
also look at the
society?
fact that, as I've said, and I think it's interesting here that the aggression here, it's equated as being evil, bad, and so forth. And yet other species have, as I said, in other species, adaptation, aggressiveness is adaptive. And I think that man can also channel his aggressive instincts in adaptive ways.
A kind of cooperative
And just
aggression?
as at one time, just as at one time in various societies and among various religions and so forth, there was an attempt to deny the sexuality of people, especially of women. This didn't do any good. It's there, and you've got to deal with it. And I feel that this is
Bruce,
exactly the same.
Can you be so adaptive as to completely change the object of the aggression?
Well, yes. Certainly now, for instance, in animal studies, if it's been shown in certain species that for one thing, that the aggressiveness is directly correlated to the level of male sex hormone. And as this level of male sex hormone builds up, there is more and more aggressive attacks. And if the animal doesn't have the object of choice to attack, which would be another male of its own species, then it'll start attacking other things, and eventually maybe even will attack stuffed dummies and so forth.
But then your original definition of aggression, I'm trying to relate this, your original definition of aggression as within a species, then seems also not to apply to man in the same sense, because if you're going to talk about attacking something other than each other, how do you see?
If you change the object,
How do you see our changing the
Yes.
object now of what I would consider to be learned aggressive behavior?
Yes. Well, now, if we're going to start on possible solutions, I think now I would think, regardless of whether or not and I must make my position clear, that I'm not saying that aggression is that we have any proof that man is innately aggressive. I think we have suggestive evidence.
We have
I have
behavior
never
to that
said. I have
effect.
never said that we have.
Oh, okay.
And I've also said that
part of
the
the
kinds of
men we know
experiments
best.
you'd have to perform to prove it one way or another can't be performed.
Then you admit that it may not be so.
But
Well,
Bruce,
it may
I
not
would like
be
you
so,
to get,
yes.
get you
Fine.
to see that the kind of observations you can make about some human behavior is sufficient evidence. You
It's
see,
broader
that
than
man
that.
has as much passive capacity as he has aggressive
Well,
capacity.
capacity,
So it gets back,
not only passive,
it gets
but-
back
but-
to a wholeness and a selection of behavior in light of a situation. And I'm trying to say that our Western culture has mandated that the situation be territorial imperative, so that we have been conditioned through every kind of learning process, formal and informal, to a material, mechanical kind of definition of our world and ourselves, so that we have reduced ourselves to clay, and we function so that we are merely an exercise in clay. And I'm saying that we are doing that by choice, and that as an oppressed person, I can see the choices because I don't have the illusion, you see, of being one with the clay, because I can't identify to the extent that the so-called affluent can with the things, and, and the money and the material. So I can look at the phenomena, remove myself from it, and seek some other explanations of my nature.
All right.
And therefore, you know, the whole message to humanity out of this Western nonsense, you know, ought to be to re-examine who we are.
Wouldn't the commandment,
Well, I certainly
thou
agree
shalt
with
not
that.
kill?
We should examine, re-examine
And
who
what
we
our
are.
purposes
we
must
need,
be.
We need a great deal more knowledge about who we are.
So we
But
don't know
it's
man's
extremely
nature.
difficult to go
Really?
to come by.
Yeah,
I
I would
think-
think that the commandment, thou shalt not kill, also implies that there is a transcendence and that there is a moral choice that can be made in terms of
The whole
society.
Judeo-Christian philosophy from the very beginning has been urging mankind to accept love as the greatest standard, contrary to what Maddie says, although I agree with in
I
an
haven't said
aspect.
anything contrary to that, Lord.
All right, but the rise of Western civilization, or certainly civilization, has been conditioned, or we have attempted, using our best brains and resources, we have attempted to try and urge love as the standard of performance since the Judeo-Christian philosophy started, and we have been remarkably unsuccessful.
Because
as you and
I would
both
say that
agree.
you've done just the opposite. You have championed the rhetoric of love and the practice of kill or be killed. And this
Why
is
is a draft
precisely,
necessary,
This is
for
precisely
example?
why the message of the cross is now distorted in the Christianity that we see around us.
I
This
agree
is
with that.
precisely why
That's not the reason
so
why,
many
though.
poor, oppressed people, you know, are still suffering with a Jesus or waiting for a Lord.
I would go along with you, but it's not the reason why. I agree that the philosophy is ineffective.
Wait, let me understand. The reason I said why people are still oppressed as they were 2,000 and 6,000 years ago is because the speakers for the established religion have spoken to the religion but have not behaved in keeping with the religion. I say this is the reason that we have an oppressed condition in humanity today, and we sit on two sides of oppression. One the oppressor and one the oppressed, and we're constantly maintaining that this is normal human behavior, and I say that that's brute force, animal behavior, and it's indicative of how primitive we are. And unless we visualize another way of life, you know, we remain brute animals.
I agree with you.
Well, that's why Christianity has lost, you know, the heart of the living Jesus or the heart of any spiritual reality.
Okay, I agree with you. The only place where I disagree with you is when you say that other civilizations, such as the Eastern civilization, is different.
No, I said there were evidences that man could live out his whole life in a passive, you know, attitude towards everything around him. And I mean, this has been demonstrated by the caste system in India. You see, it's accepted by some of the
They've
people
been
that it
sterilized, in
victimizes.
effect, yeah.
Well, they've been conditioned one way, we've been conditioned another way.
By
I'm
brute
simply
force.
saying let's limit our observations about behavior to those where we observe that behavior, and let's recognize that there are some men living with opposite kinds of behavior, and that's input. The fact that there are large numbers of men who can live passively.
There aren't
is
large
input.
numbers. It's
Well,
extremely
yeah,
rare to be
no,
able
no,
to
no.
find these
Well,
groups.
No, this has been
Right.
traditional
Right.
for a lot of people.
Right around
Well,
us.
Only
Because
because they're
they
forced
believe,
to.
no, they have certain philosophies. For instance, some of the Eastern religions have this reincarnation where the caste to which you were born in
Yes.
has a direct, you know, relationship to some infinity which you're always
This
in.
hasn't stopped the history of violent warfare in
But I'm
these
saying,
countries.
But why
while
is it
this is there,
necessary,
then you have to admit that
Bruce?
the two, you see, are as natural to man as one as the other. One is as natural to man as the other. So that you can't call one, the aggression, you know, his nature as contrasted with the other, his nature. So you have to say man is naturally capable of aggression or non-aggression, which is not
No,
to
he
make
is-
a definition.
He is not capable
or
of
fear.
non-aggression.
Well,
But I'd like to pick up what Bruce said in terms
non-aggressive.
of warfare and ask why is it necessary to have such intensive training for soldiers in order to get them to go out and kill? Why is it necessary to draft people if this is innate and everybody's just waiting for the opportunity to go let blood?
Because
I'd like to
because I think fear in the face of threat is also, as it is in other animals, is also in an innate, a built-in mechanism.
Well, what
and
about
I
when the
agree
penalties
fully
for
with
not
and
going are
one of
greater?
the problems Yes, of
Say if
course.
somebody's going to spend the rest of his life in jail and he
Men do
chooses
have to
not
be.
to
In
kill.
fact, you're threatened. You're told either you go kill the enemy or we'll kill you, because as the penalty for desertion during
Well,
war
why do
is
we
being
have
shot.
to do this if this is so innate?
Well, because men also are innately afraid of being killed, and afraid of both these mechanisms occur also in other species, and there's often conflict situations which arise when these two mechanisms are elicited at the same time. But I think this gives me a chance to bring up one of the points about this short-circuiting. Evolution has produced in other animals an adaptive pattern of aggressive behavior. But in man, genetically, we're still probably basically the same as we were in very primitive days. But our culture and our technology has accelerated so fast that adaptive mechanisms have not there hasn't been time for adaptive mechanisms to develop, and especially the development of long-range weapons. Weapons which permit killing at a distance. Because one of the things among most species of animals, the rules of the game, as I said, there's rarely bloodshed, because usually early in the game, one animal gives up. Sometimes there's never even in any contact. In certain birds, there's displays of feathers. And then one bird says, man, you did it better than I did.
It's
you
sort
win.
of a signal, and there really isn't any
They know
conflict.
the rules of the game.
Usually, yes.
And they have ways of signaling
Well,
to
that's
each
very
other, I
different
give
from
up
aggression.
and I quit. But when you can shoot a man at a distance, then it's much easier. And to use an extreme example, I wonder how many of the airmen, how many pilots who can drop napalm on a village, let's say, how many of those same men could go in and pour gasoline on a person and set that person afire? I think there are many less. Our weapons now have short-circuited some of the basic mechanisms which I still think we have for submission. A person doesn't have any chance to make submissive gestures. The ultimate, of course, is somebody sitting a couple of thousand feet down on the ground with a button that he can push,
Bruce,
which
could
can
I
destroy
ask, in the light
everyone.
of kill or be killed,
Yes.
what makes certain people choose to prefer to kill than to be killed, since we know, as Clay, we're going to be destroyed, we're born dying. I mean, we come into a very limited kind of life, which has to culminate in the return of the Clay. And knowing that, what is it that makes the choice preferable in the way you're talking about the airmen and all those people? Why is it that they would rather kill than to be killed, knowing that they're going to die anyway? And that they were born
because you'd
to
rather
die.
die later than now.
Why? No, this is not true. There are some who, would just go on and get it over with now. I mean, like, I don't feel that Malcolm X wanted to die, but I think he preferred to be killed, you see, than to kill or permit innocent killing. He took a defensive posture, and he was killed. Dr. King, this message, 2,000 years ago, it was projected for the world.
These men are rare. These men are martyrs, and they're very rare.
But they're not rare. They're only rare in the extent that history chooses to use them. But I know many people who will live by their ideals, you see, rather than live by someone else's dictates or commands. This is what's happening with the young people in this country today, and it has happened in other times.
Maddie, I think I
Not
can
an
answer.
exception.
I think there is a very clear answer to your question in what I would call Audreyism, with all due respects to those people who contributed to it. I think all of us are tending, or at least the line of discussion here seems to be indicating a singular nature of man, i.e. that man is genetically, I guess, aggressive. But I don't think Audrey says that, or these people. I don't think so.
He says it phylogenetically aggressive, yes, he does.
Yeah, but he also says, too, that in order to survive, man had to learn to operate within a group and to be prepared to give of himself up to and including committing suicide, that the group might survive. And there are some very interesting discussions on baboon and baboon behavior in African Genesis. So that I think that what I'm trying to imply here is that man has a dual nature, predominantly aggressive, but also recessively altruistic, if you'll accept that term.
No, I won't accept that he has a dual nature. He basically has capacities beyond which we are willing to concede because we don't want to acknowledge our primitive condition. It's that given a survival situation, you know, the man will perform truly. You know, white Americans don't have a survival threat except in terms of their possessions and how they identify with them. This is the whole
you mean to tell
motivation
me-
that's pushing
you mean to tell me-
mainstream America is what they call the American way of life, what they call free enterprise, many things which have been so distorted already, you know, by the political and economic forces in this country.
You've just said that Malcolm X and other people are willing to lay down their lives for their brothers.
But
Well, I
not
didn't
for
put
the-
it that
not
way.
for-
I
not
said
for
they
property and territory.
they necessarily had to live the ideal
All right.
that they held to be important, whether or not
I agree with
they
that.
would be killed.
And that's what I'm saying. That aspect, the quality.
That's a
that
single
Mal-
nature. That wasn't a dual nature.
Yes, but that same quality which existed in Malcolm X also existed in many, many men of all races. And
Precisely my point
well, I
before,
said
that
we agree.
history, Western recorded history chooses for very definite reasons to highlight certain of these instances where men live by their ideals in order to minimize, you see, that this kind of life, you know, is the vision that we should be moving towards. They make them into examples precisely so other people can say, well, it's unusual, is a divine educator, that's God incarnated. You know, in other words, I'm not responsible
All right,
for
so
living
Western
ideals.
man is just as capable of making this sacrifice or this demonstrating this form of life as Malcolm X was.
Malcolm was a Western man.
Okay,
Unfortunately,
okay.
for you, he outgrew the Western mentality. And,
Oh,
and he
come on,
became
come on.
much greater. Well, I mean, you have to face it, Lloyd. The Western mentality is
question
hung
we're-
up in a
we're-
materialistic
yeah, but
rat
Maddie,
race.
we're not
There's
we're not
a cleavage
discussing
between Western
culture here.
religious concepts as expressed and the behavior
Yeah, we're not
of
talking
the
about
proponents of this.
yeah, we're
but
not
I
talking
think,
about culture. We're talking about man's
I think-
behavior.
well,
That's
that's
his
what
culture.
culture is.
No.
That's his time and place
No.
behavior. Culture
Man-
is man's time,
no.
place behavior.
Man's behavior is predicated upon his genetic inheritance, which goes back 25
Right,
million
but that,
years.
that doesn't, you know, express the limitations that he has. And you're trying to
Oh,
limit
it
him to what
certainly
his
does
behavior
express
has
his
exhibited.
limitations and also his potential.
I am not limited to what Western civilization has projected upon the world.
Yeah, but
Well, how
no
do,
one
how
said
do you
that.
see,
No
how
one
do you
said that.
see opening up
We said that
this
you may be limited
potential?
by your biological heritage.
You're limited by your biological
But this has
heritage.
not
All
been
right.
demonstrated in behavior because you don't know the capacity.
And the whole
All you
history
know
of
is what you can
technology.
observe.
What do you mean we don't know the capacity? I think that throughout the history of the recorded history of man, which is some 4,000 years, we have demonstrated practically the potential of man. From Michelangelo down to the street cleaner.
We who?
We, man. Man.
Even the
Westerns.
Hopi Indians, I mean, when
yeah,
you
the
throw
Hopi
in...
Indians, the
Yeah.
Japanese, the Africans.
We have
who
demonstrated a behavior, but I am not convinced that we have exhausted our potential.
Oh, no one says.
Nor have,
no one
nor
says.
have we clearly
But
visualized
we have
our potential.
demonstrated a very high demonstration of reality, 99% or 98%.
No, I say it's been a very primitive demonstration up to this
with
point.
Beethoven.
Yes,
How
with
do
Beethoven.
we open
And,
up the potential?
I mean, you know, how
Lloyd?
can you
Well, all right,
worship
I'm not
Beethoven.
proposing. I'm
How do we
saying-
remove
Beethoven
these
and Charlie
barriers
Parker.
to this potential?
Yeah, and James Brown, Stevie Wonder. I mean,
Okay,
Beethoven
okay.
can't touch Stevie Wonder.
Well,
And
that's a
Beethoven's
subjective evaluation.
father
I'll
was a
accept
mulatto.
it. But I'm saying within the generations
I mean,
of
what are you
man
claiming
since recorded history,
here?
we have individuals who have performed in extreme manners and have thereby demonstrated a potential of human beings, which is potential to all human beings.
Well, I
regardless of race.
resist your describing this as extreme because then it gets to be something
Well,
accessible
unusual.
to the...
No, unusual. I think
I don't
Beethoven was
accept that.
unusual, and I think Malcolm
well,
X
that
was
was a
unusual. and
technical
I think,
skill in combination with a talent. And,
well,
you know,
all right, it's part of
that's a
human
very
potential.
specific- yeah, that's a
all right, it's part of
specific
human
thing.
potential. And we're talking about human potential and man's behavioral characteristic and what is man's potential. And
All right,
man's
let's talk about what is the potential.
All right, man's
how do we
potential
open it?
is demonstrated, I think, by a visualization of man's performance for the last 2,000 years and
That's
before.
his past. That's not his potential. I'm saying that his potential is far greater than his
It
past
may
has
well be.
indicated.
It may
I'm
well
saying
be.
that it has to be.
And even in the
I
past,
think
there
it
are
may well have to
indications
be,
of that
or we
potential.
will
then
not
let's
survive.
get on and create that.
All right,
you know, kind of
okay, so now
reality.
how do we get on? But we first must start on getting on with an understanding of what we are. If we just try to do it on wishful thinking and dreaming, Maddie, we're going to fail, and somebody's going to push the button.
What do you mean wishful
Lloyd,
thinking and
Just
dreaming?
that.
in terms of understanding what we are, there is one approach, which is the biologically limited approach. There are other approaches, and I'd like to hear from Judah, who has expressed another approach, how he sees removing some of the barriers to potential, because I think to open up the potential for this diversity, because I think we've got some choices to make, and we need to question, you know, how, on what basis we make these choices.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind, I don't profess to say that it's an all-inclusive answer by any means, but is the role of symbols and ritual in society. We tend to be, in this day and age, rather iconoclastic, and we tend to dislike symbols and ritual, and things shouldn't be ritualistic. I think that's less because we are capable of doing without the symbols and that we've lost an understanding of their meaning.
Right.
I sort of view symbols and rituals often as the poetry of life, which have the ability at various times when we are faced with situations that perhaps remind us of this problem. By engaging in the symbolic act or the ritual act, it calls it to mind enough to bring it to consciousness so that we are, in the daily routine, I'm not talking about on a once-a-year basis, but in daily routine, take the biological act or fact and try and convert it into something else. The act of eating can be converted beyond simply the act of killing an animal and digesting what you found. It can be made into an expression somehow of a concern for life and for other human beings. In the same way, a day of rest, whether it be a Sunday or a Saturday, can be developed as a routine in the everyday working of man, once a week out of the 7 days when he withdraws from the competitiveness of the secular life to try and see his fellow man in another context, as another human being, not someone with whom he's in competition or against whom he's engaged in some form of battle. And I think really there is a need, not for so much a return to ritual, I think the ritual is there to be found, or the symbols are there to be found, but to a better appreciation of what their function is and what their meaning is.
Would you agree, Jude, that it's not that we've just lost these, but that they've been deliberately supplanted by other kinds of things that crop up in our entertainment, in our so-called recreation, that we've been deliberately diverted
I would agree
from
with
the
that.
meaningful continuum of humanity and a common search for nobler ways of life? We've been diverted into the whole body-worshiping culture, which says that we've reached some epitome and we call it a standard of living, and isn't it great, and how do we export it, when we really should be saying, you know, have we really left the caves, which we agreed in earlier that we hadn't, and what is it that we should be seeking? And I say it's the wholeness which you mentioned before, because this is where I feel the balance is meaningful, not in a standard or static or any economic definition, but in a dynamics, you see, of interacting between passive and aggressive, and between all of the multiplicity of capacities that we have, which is why I go to, if territorial rights, you know, I mean, territorial imperative is real, then so are squatters' rights. How do we begin to create the kind of balance so that man, in his aggression, you know, has outlets that don't deny his passive desires too?
Well, that's bring a point that I think these 2 points here, and one of the role of religion, also, and the point that you're making here. I think that one of the things that we need is a return to, I think we can take a leaf out of the book of some of the so-called more primitive religions. And I think that one of the functions of, one of the things that we need is ways of blowing off steam, ways of getting rid of a lot of our aggressive impulses that are built up. And of course, one of the things I think almost all of us would agree upon, whether or not aggression is innate or not, is that frustration tends to make people aggressive. Frustration of other drives tends to make you aggressive. I think whether or not this is innate or learned, whatever. And that one of the things we need are ways of blowing off steam. And I think, although some people might not take this very seriously, that religion might seriously look at some of the older religions in which orgies were organized orgies were a regular way of life, a way of really blowing off steam. When people got together and really let themselves go, they danced until they fell on the ground. They got drunk, or they used other drugs to release themselves. They had sexual experiences. They let themselves go. They blew their minds.
But Bruce, I think
we're so closed in. We're so
Wait a
uptight.
minute.
And this is one way, I think, one place where
But
religion
the
can have...
motivation of those people was not to blow off steam. It was to relate to their God or to do something meaningful, which came to us through the symbols
Well,
and rituals.
it had the
so
function
again,
of
the
blowing
reason
off
we
steam.
have the need to blow off steam is because we really have no meaningful relationship to a universal context. You know, we're isolated lumps of clay, and that's why you talk about blowing off steam. But if you have a meaningful relationship to the universe and you interact, you know, with each other, with your environment, and with what you visualize as the intelligent force that controls all this and seeks the balance, that comes out in a ritual or, you know, a discipline. And so I would prefer what Jude says, to begin to go back and recover the meanings rather than to just blow off steam, which is why we've got the false, you know, kinds of things for entertainment and recreation, precisely because they permit us to blow off steam, but they don't let us understand. Well,
They're
yes,
passive.
they do. Yes,
Almost
they
all
do.
our forms of entertainment
I
are
know,
passive.
but that's the kind of steam we've got now, which is why
You don't blow
We've
off
got
steam when you're
totally
in passive
contradictory
entertainment.
values, you see, where once again, the majority of the concepts of what is good and right and what we ought to do are not followed, are not practiced, and are in contradiction to the value of fight for territory, property, aggressiveness, etc. And I think that it's a failure to really deal with and develop basic human values that are supportive of human needs as we see them now, not going back to look at animal needs, but to look at human needs, the need for survival, the need for light, air, food, shelter,
And
all of what has
discharge
been
aggressive
developed.
impulses.
and truth.
The aggressive impulses, I would maintain, are responses to frustration of these basic human needs,
Right.
which I'll come back
Right.
to again, which are food. And
I would certainly
beyond,
agree with it.
and
It increases
beyond-
them. But.
Right, and beyond food, shelter, and so on, the need for human interaction, relationship, love, God, as Maddie would describe it. I just don't think that you can simply justify or explain behavior that we see now that I would consider to be responses to the situation as innate human traits. That we should change the situation, and after we've removed all these barriers, you show me that man's innate aggressive behavior remaining, then I might go along with
I think
you.
that the job is much too great and the time much too short to simply to blow off the steam. I much prefer your earlier approach that if we've got this steam, rather than simply blow it off and dissipate it, that we try and
In
channel it
positive ways.
into some positive approach. That's why your concept of the orgy, I'd much rather convert that orgy into some positive expression, such as, for example, the concept that's becoming increasingly popular in the Catholic Church of a type of dinner, you know, to symbolize the last dinner, or in the Judaism, the Passover ceremony, where you take that same, perhaps, approach of trying to act in a group and to do something, and yet at the same time you try and channel it in such a way that it has a new meaning which takes you another step further.
It sounds too civilized to me.
Yeah,
we need ways of blowing off steam in primitive ways, because we have primitive impulses, and if we sit around with our coats and ties on and so forth, and we're not going to really blow off
But
steam.
Bruce, we're not going to lose our primitive impulses. We're going to evolve, you know, other levels of characteristics.
All right, there are other ways of channeling, and I
Yeah.
agree that you
So it's
can
not
channel.
either or. What
There
Jude's
are ways
saying
you
is
can
correct.
attack not only other human beings, you can attack problems.
But you can stop the orientation of attack, you see. You can begin to
Our language is
internalize
full of
and
this, yeah.
use and create. You see, when you say channel steam or energy, you don't really, you mean use it, you see? Channel means something you do to somebody else. Again, it's imposing or opposing, you know, but I'm saying each of us must be that conscious element which tunes in on, you know, the constructive phase of the creation that's going on rather than the destructive phase, which is what we're oriented to because we're in a decadent society.
Well, that's fine, and I hope we can direct our aggressive impulses towards problems rather than towards people. But I think until we arrive at the stage where we've removed all of our aggressions, I think in the meantime it would be a good idea to have ways of blowing off steam, things as I have suggested. I think this would be
Well,
very...
let me say
What
where we
are
are.
some of your solutions to this? I'd like to hear again. I haven't really heard any proposals.
We're all going at
from the
different
other
levels,
proponent of this,
interestingly
yeah.
enough, and a lot of this is semantics, because to my ear, I think all of us have a very common agreement on our objectives. We all aspire to simply the peaceable kingdom. Now, the question is how to get there. Now, shut up, Maddie.
Well, I'm not aspiring to the peaceful kingdom.
Well, all right.
Let's
Leave it be
escalate
for a moment. I hope
positively
the
here.
audience understands what I'm trying to transmit
Yes.
here. Now, I believe, as I've said before, that we are biologically and innately aggressive with an underlying strong indication or effort toward altruism. I think that the society that we develop in the future must take cognizance of this natural nature of man, and I think that our society should be one wherein the aggressive aspects of our nature would be penalized after a point, and I think that the altruistic aspects of our nature should be rewarded also after a point. Now, I'm not saying here, this gets down to the free enterprise system and economics and our legal structure, and I think that the American system of free enterprise is, within certain limits, terribly desirable as a format for social organization. But I think the American free enterprise system, as it presently has evolved, needs very, very major adjustments if the American society is going to survive. I think, for example, that a step which would guarantee a minimum income to all people would tend to relieve much of the frustrations which is now felt in the poorer classes and tend to relieve some of the aggression in that particular area. I also feel equally strongly that there should be a ceiling imposed at which nobody in this country could acquire more than a given amount of wealth. I think there is a much too high concentration of wealth. In fact, I think something like 1 million people in the United States out of 200 million own something like 35% of the investment capital in this country. And this kind of thing is extremely dangerous to our society, and in fact, in the long run, will destroy it. So that if a man can gain a certain given quantity of dollars, having used his free enterprise techniques, then I think efforts beyond that should be develop rewards for altruistic pursuits, like, for example, the president of General Motors or some such symbolic man, having gained an income of X dollars a year, would not be allowed to get more than that, but would be rewarded by some other method if he devoted his excess energies to some sort of an altruistic purpose, such as running a hospital or doing something for the good of man.
And who would limit him? In other words, are you expecting this 1% then to suddenly at some point altruistically deny the territorial imperative, which is their major, I think, a supportive kind of philosophy for people who already have property and territory? You think that this 1% will deny the territorial imperative and say,
hell no, they're not
here,
gonna
spread it around?
No, sir. You're going to have to fight tooth and claw to get it away from them, I'll tell you that. And the reason why they've got it is because they and their forebears, plus a good element of chance, has made them, or they have proved to be the most successful predators in the jungle.
How does this square with Christianity, which
I don't think it does at all.
I
don't think it does at all. But I think Christianity is a beautiful, wishful thinking, and including Judaism to the extent that I understand it, and I'm not going to say that I do understand it, but I think that this type of wishful thinking is the kind of thing that's leading us down the garden path to oblivion.
That Christianity is the kind of wishful thinking which will, what is your response to
Well, I agree with all the proposals you made.